Hello, welcome to another edition of Inspired to Act. I'm Diane Holt.
I'm Will Leach. Hello.
This is a podcast from Thrive Ireland, helping you to think about the realities of peace building and reconciliation and stepping up to make a difference. We're produced with support from the Northern Ireland Community Relations Council.
It's lovely to have you with us. Remember to subscribe or follow so you don't ever miss an episode, and tell your friends how they can listen too.
Have you told your friends?
Both of them, yes.
Oh, well done. We're recorded and edited at the studios of Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald, back in the cosy surroundings of Studio 2.
Yes, hello again. Good old Studio 2. We love you because we can't really afford Studio 1. Dan, what are we doing this time?
Well, I have my long-term and I would say old friend David Campton in the studio with us today.
David, welcome.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here.
Tell us much more, Diane.
Well, David is a minister and now the Superintendent of Belfast Central Mission. But he has had a very long and interesting journey before he became Superintendent of Belfast Central Mission. In fact, he started by studying biological sciences and he was also an actor. In fact, we were acting together at school. So I suppose I was really interested to know some of his journey and some of the really exciting experiences he's had, and probably ones that he hasn't probably even told me yet.
David, the obvious question, and hello, it's lovely to have you with us, is if you study biology, why do you go into the theatre? That's the first one.
That's a long story in itself, largely down to bad careers advice at
whole
school.
Episode to fill. So keep going.
I mean, it's the classic story of grammar school child and the choices that you're given at my age of, you know, if you're good at sciences, you go into medicine. If you're good at the arts, you go into law. If you're mediocre at stuff, you go into teaching. Oops, I annoy all the teachers out there. But I got halfway through the pathway that would have taken me to medicine, and I decided, no, I didn't really want to be a doctor. I wanted to be an actor, but I didn't really know the pathway to do that and get a proper qualification. Yeah, Diane's got a qualification, but it's not a proper qualification.
Yes, I'm used to her work.
So I thought, I'll go to Edinburgh. I will study biology and spend all my time in the theatre. And essentially that's what I did, to the extent that when my degree was published, the professor that had responsibility for it looked at the degree on the wall, looked at me and said, well, David, that wasn't bad for a hobby.
Really?
I completed my biological sciences, zoology degree, and then went to work in the theatre for a period of time. But by that stage, I already had a sense that God was calling me in a completely different direction, not one that I had planned.
So was it I'm acting now, but I'm doing it for a bit? Or were you producing? Were you directing? What
I was doing a bit of everything. I was acting, directing, doing technical work, sitting behind a tech desk, both as a sound engineer and a lighting director, doing some fight directing. You name it, I did just about everything.
You even came down to Aberystwyth at one point and did a two-hander of Brian Friel with me.
I did indeed, yes, and pranced around on the prom doing another show as well. So, yeah, did all manner of things on the theatre side of things. But as I said, yeah, by the time I was working professionally in the theatre, I already had a sense that God had other plans for me. I left here in Northern Ireland in 1985, never, ever intending to come back. And certainly...
A lot of people do.
Yeah, my generation, that was true of most of the folks that I was at school with.
Did you intend to come back down?
I had no intention of coming back either.
Neither did I.
I had to be.
Here we all are.
Yes, indeed. That's another story, but God also had a different plan for me. But I think, David, faith was always really important to you. And in fact, my own faith journey's been really shaped by yours, because and it was drama as well, because we were at Sydenham Methodist Church doing a Christian mission called Searchlight, when I think really it came to the point where I had to make a decision on my faith. So faith was hugely important to you. What was it in the end, though, that made you feel that the Christian ministry was something? Because, I mean, that would have been the least likely thing, I would have thought.
Yeah, particularly because I had a gap year between school and going to Edinburgh where I worked for the church, and I finished that year and said never again. And I'm not joking about that. A year that I enjoyed, but I thought, no, I just don't want to be involved in the mechanics of church. But what ultimately made the difference was, as I said, I left here not wanting to be back, largely because of the whole political mix, partly because I had a theology that was disconnected from what was happening here. It was, we're in the world but not of it type stuff, and I couldn't see where our faith made an impact on what was happening here, and yet it was perceived to be one of the factors that divided us. So I just wanted to distance myself from it. And what happened was that I was working in the theatre in that whole 1988 period, that 14 days running from the Gibraltar shooting through to the killings of Derek Woods and David Howe, the two corporals in Casement Park. And through that period, I had a sense of God saying to me, what are you going to do about it? I literally was sitting in a pub in between rehearsals, watching the news coming through from Andersonstown, and that was in my head. And I didn't want to hear it, but that was there. And I explored that and a sense of call into ministry in its broadest sense, really for the next year and a half before giving in.
You see, what's going to interest Diane and me is I remember those days. Everybody who was alive and an adult then remembers those days.
Yes.
One of my closest friends, he's sadly no longer with us at work, was a photographer who shot a lot of that and couldn't quite believe what he was pressing the shutter on. I have close friends who frankly smuggled television camera tapes out of that situation to make sure that they were seen and that the world knew what had happened, and so on and so on and so on. The difference is you then did something. A lot of people, and I'm not having to go at people, but didn't at that time change what they were doing because they hadn't been part of it, they hadn't caused it, they weren't culpable in any way. But you did something. So what was the impetus that made you say, I can't not do this?
Well, I mean, it was about pieces falling into place. I had begun to be aware of the stuff that was ongoing back here in Northern Ireland. You've already had a discussion with the folks who were part of Iconi in the early days, and that struck a chord with me that made me realise that there was a connect between faith and politics and conflict and peace and reconciliation, and that we did have, as people of faith, a part to play. And then, what would be my role in it? I was still devoted to using my skills in the arts and was trying to explore ways of doing that, and still to this day try to explore that, sometimes with greater or lesser success. But also, I was reluctant to go down the route of ordained ministry because I had a picture of the ordained minister as this person in a pulpit who, spoke on religious matters, and that was it. But it was actually my minister in Edinburgh who, in a broadcast from the Church of Scotland Assembly, was talking about what ministry was about. And it was a whole new vision for me of what ministry was about, which was about facilitating others to be what God had called them to be, and enabling others to play their part in wider society. And suddenly everything fell into place, that call for me about what are you going to do about it, and that it's not all about me. It's not, that you're the answer to everything. It's about me being called to play my part in helping others to play their part, whatever part that might be. And that's, yes, about peace and reconciliation, but it's also about a whole range of other things in the world. And that was, other people may say, oh, that's not really that revolutionary. It was for me then, and it has continued to make a difference to how I view ministry and my practice of it to this day.
You've been in a real variety of congregations, David, and I know the Methodist Church always sort of send you to where you think your gifts are. I mean, you started in Glastonbury and Portaferry, and then where did you head on to from there?
I served in Glastonbury and Portaferry, a nice, quiet, rural setting. But even there, the troubles washed up on my doorstep, particularly around the Drumcree protests. And I ended up involved in, I wasn't seeking it, but it ended up in a mediation role there with no skills. But then from there I was sent to Sandy Row and Springfield Road, and within 4 days of being in Springfield Road, someone had tried to burn down the church there on the Peace Wall in West Belfast. And if I'd heard one more person talk about a baptism of fire or a warm welcome, I think I probably would have thumped them.
Blessed are the
ministers tend to do.
Look, I think that there's an Old Testament perspective on this at times. Get a bit Nehemiah on them. That set the tone for my ministry. There it was in at the deep end, both in Springfield Road, where those two communities were cheek by jowl, separated by a wall which got higher during my period there. It was after the Good Friday Agreement, after the iconic visit of Bill Clinton to the area. They'd built a nice, attractive wall for him coming, to replace the old corrugated one, but they increased the height of it during my period there. It was characterised by riots over the White Rock Parade, and then in Sandy Row again, the problems with paramilitary dominance, a deeply insecure community threatened by what was a Belfast that was coming to terms with new opportunities, and here was a community right in the heart of Belfast, frightened by that because it promised potential change. And sadly, in the 20 years since, that community has not been able to healthily embrace change. It has remained paralysed by fear. I'm still involved in that community trying to make a difference. So Sandy Row, Springfield Road, that was another interesting 5 years, and then they sent me to Ballybean, near the Commission Studios here for 9 years.
Very handy for here, yeah.
And again, a major Protestant loyalist unionist community with major social deprivation issues, and again, major paramilitary presence within it, and all of the issues that brings, all the challenges. It's been an interesting time.
All the issues, all the challenges, that was your wee throwaway phrase there. Born of experience, I know that. But when you're in a world where there's either mistrust of them's next door across the wall or from them's next door across the wall, where do you even start as a minister? You can preach the gospel, but that can't be all you're doing. You've got to bring that part of life into that other part of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, I'm enormously self-critical. And I would say that one of the areas where I have perhaps failed at times is that, yes, I would preach into the situation and bring gospel values to the challenges that we face within a pulpit. And I would attempt to bring those values to play in the wider community. But all too often it was about me going to do those things and engage rather than fulfilling that vision that had originally been given about ministry, about enabling others to do it as well as I might do. Lots of research has been done about, what have been called maverick ministers making a real difference throughout the time of the Troubles here in Northern Ireland. And, I take my hat off to many of them who went down that road before me and inspired me in many ways. But the difficulty is that we may have achieved more by motivating more people to do things so that it is not a Lone Ranger endeavour.
But of course, that's always the challenge,
others.
David, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I always think about it in terms of it's far easier if your child, comes home with a relatively easy maths homework for you to do their homework for them than it is for you to sit for half an hour or 45 minutes to help them to understand.
Yeah.
So do you feel you're working differently now because of that learning?
Partly. I'm also in a different position now in that within Belfast Central Mission, which operates over a much wider range of settings through very professional teams, I'm somewhat at a distance from some of the on-the-ground work that would be going on now, but I still seek to bring those values to play in my support of those staff members and indeed inspiring congregations to get alongside the work that we do. You're right. I mean, it is easier, it is quicker to do things yourself at times.
If you think about when a journalist rings you up after something horrible's happened and it's 10 o'clock in the morning and they've got to get something on by tea time and maybe a little something on by lunchtime, and whether they're Belfast Telegraph, Irish News, Belfast Live, BBTV, whoever, they're going to want it now. And you do it now or you don't do it. Yeah. And if you think who speaks
Absolutely.
for the people I know and represent and serve, it's going to be you, isn't it?
Yeah. Although the interesting thing is that I have tended, that's one of the areas where I have tended not to operate when I have been approached by journalists in the past.
I think if I ever rang you up.
Well, actually, I was just remembering one time when you did, when I was minister in Sandy Row, and I said that I, in the wake of a set of riots there, and I said I don't think that I'm the person that you need to be talking to.
I'll have put the phone down and said to the room, he's no good.
Absolutely, and I can understand that. But because a lot of what I have done in the past in communities, I have sought to do behind the scenes, under the radar, and actually being too public a voice in those settings would have inhibited a lot of that.
Well, I have a question sitting here. It says, times to be overt or times to be discreet. And that's exactly that, isn't it? There's times actually the skill is in not saying anything that the world hears.
Yeah.
And I mean, surely you must be able to look back though and think of those moments when actually you have seen some transformation in people because you have been journeying with them. So I mean, can you give us some examples of those stories of hope and stories of people now that you've left maybe in some of those places who are now doing amazing stuff?
It's difficult to put my finger on things, and it certainly wouldn't be down to anything that I have, directly.
We're not negating
done.
God being involved in it now, David. I mean, you're a minister.
But it's actually it's that mosaic of different people doing different things. That the ongoing work that is still happening in Fourth Spring on the interface there in Springfield Road, against the odds. 25 years after it was set up. It's still there plugging away. I mean, it was deeply depressing a couple of years ago when there were riots happening again there on the Springfield Road. It was like flashback for me. In fact, there was a certain small scale PTSD, but they were 25 years later they were still on the ground. They're doing what was needed to be done at that flashpoint. Different communities here in Ballybean, the congregations, not just the Methodist congregation, but other congregations, deeply involved in the food bank here in the local community, showing a level of cooperation between churches in addressing that need that was very, very difficult to motivate during my time here. So things have moved on. I hope that I played a part in that, but I would be reluctant to claim, anything.
You're listening to Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. Podcasters love to take a quick break sometimes. Here's one of ours.
It's Kerry Gregg here, and I hope you're enjoying Inspired to Act. I have news of another Christian podcast that you might want to enjoy as well. The Commission Files brings you stories from Christians living and working all over the world.
From Greenland in the west to the Baltic states in the east. From Norway in the north down to Cyprus in the south.
Working in all areas of life.
There wasn't one tin of beans, there wasn't one tin of soup in our cupboards. So what we'd brought her that day was basically all she had.
Find us on the Commission Files as I join Will Leach to seek out the stories most inspiring to you. Available where you downloaded this podcast.
You're back with Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. Will and I are chatting with David Campton. You're now involved, and how on earth did you end up getting involved with the Four Corners Festival? I mean, You've been involved with community relations stuff, creativity. I mean, it seems perfect for you.
Remind us what it is, by the way.
Yeah, the Four Corners Festival is an annual faith-based peace-building festival. It takes place first full week in February every year. And the whole aim of it is to bring people out of the four corners of Belfast, to get them to explore different places, different ideas, to encounter different people, make new friends. But it's not just about moving people out of geographical spaces. It's about getting them to explore different theological, political spaces as well. And we try to do it in as creative a way as possible. We use discussions and talks, but we do use drama and sport and music. And that's the whole aim of it. It's generally about 8 to 10 days of insanity for those who are involved in the planning of it. Nothing much else gets done during that period.
And you certainly have got some very interesting people involved in your drama. Could you tell us a little bit about one of those where there were MLAs involved?
That was during one of those periods of time when things weren't happening much in Stormont.
One of those times.
One of those times.
When would that have been? I'm trying to think.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but during that period, I thought that it might be an interesting idea to do a dramatised reading of Seamus Heaney's Curate Troy with some politicians and other public figures here, some of whom had been, radically affected by the Troubles, because Curate Troy was originally supposed to be staged in the Grand Opera House way back when, but a bomb explosion had meant that the original run of it didn't happen. So we weren't able to stage it in the Opera House as part of the festival, but we did stage it in the Europa, which was also damaged in that bomb attack. And we had a performance, a rehearsed reading with those MLAs and other public figures, and a discussion afterwards.
So who was actually involved?
Everyone from Naomi Long and Claire Hanna and you got me off. Marcin O'Mulwar was there. He was playing Odysseus, the cunning plotter.
So did it work?
It did.
What
it
were
really
the responses?
Did.
I mean, what did
the response was amazing. Michael Longley also came along. Michael, being a very close friend of Seamus, and he read his poem, which again looks at the whole Trojan War ceasefire, and he read it at the conclusion of the event, and there was hardly a dry eye in the house as we thought about that whole issue, about the place of forgiveness and reconciliation within all of this, in the face of unspeakable horror. And yeah, it did work. I mean, it really it got people talking, and again, it got different people into a space of thinking about, how do we do things differently in this space.
Anybody who's ever produced anything is immediately thinking, how did you get them to do it? How did you sell this to a crowd of Northern Ireland politicians?
I don't know how I managed it, really. I really don't. I do remember a number of very strange conversations on my hands-free phone as I drove around Belfast, trying to persuade them. But yeah, they came on board. And,
I'm sure they weren't doing much else at the time.
That has been said, and it was it was interesting. Yeah.
Is there anything else in the Four Corners that really sticks in your mind as something that's been really helpful for opening up minds of people?
Well, I mean, famously, we did cause a riot one year due to an event in the Skeno Centre at East Belfast Mission, the Newton Arch Road, where we had the Brighton bomber, Patrick McGee, talking to the daughter of a victim, Joe Berry, and it was about talking to your enemies. That was the whole theme, but it was somewhat misrepresented in the local community, and there was a serious standoff between police and local communities. But those in the room, there were some there who were challenged and by it, but also challenged what we were doing. Al McBride, who you've talked to on a previous podcast, he was there and engaged with the process there. But it was an important discussion, dealing with difficult issues. We were perhaps naive at the time. It was shortly after the whole flag protest.
And in that
and
flag dispute, I'd followed, as a journalist, riots up that road, past that very building, where, the Land Rover's in a line, pushing forward 50 metres at a time after they've made their announcement, get out of the way, blah, blah, blah. Ironically enough, I remember thinking, with a number of fires on the road and missiles flying about, not a single touch on that building. Everybody was from what's ours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was a very tense time.
Yeah, no, it was. If you're not raising issues that touch raw nerves, then we're probably not doing our job. But we have other events that are less contentious, but can make a real impact on people. A friend, Jim Deeds, who's a Catholic layperson, and myself, the two of us lead a walk every year through some part of Belfast. We call it the Wonderful Wander, and essentially we lead a group of people around Belfast. We talk a bit about the history of the area that we're going through. We read poetry, some of which we have written ourselves, and encourage others to share it.
Yes, I was there one year.
And you a poem?
I had a poem and maybe a little monologue to read.
A dialogue and So we do that every year and try to go through a different part of Belfast. And again, we've had people ending up in parts of the city that they've never been in before, but also looking at familiar parts of the city through different eyes, thinking about the history of it for good or ill.
I think that's really important, even in your own community, to go out and look in a very different way at it, because you have to give that space to let something different happen, to let God speak to you, and I find that walk really, really powerful.
Service now provided by the Belfast Translink glider. If you nod off, you wake up in a part of the city you've never been to before.
Well, it's interesting that we ran an event in St John's at the top of the falls, the Catholic parish there, where we looked at a book published by the Presbyterian Church looking at the Troubles. We actually did that event in St John's, a Catholic church, and a lot of people came via the glider from East Belfast up into West Belfast. It was a packed event, a really moving event. But again, lots of people coming to that part of the city who had never been there before and had probably never been in a Catholic church before. Saying that it was an important night in their lives. And actually, this coming year in February, we are having an event in the city cemetery, partly inspired by that. We're inviting people who may have had family plots in the cemetery but haven't been to them in years to come and to explore the cemetery with it. Young people have been to tidy up those plots in advance.
That's fascinating. That's a big deal because there's so much of that cemetery nobody ever goes to. Yeah. There's actually war graves in there if you go looking for them. There's a whole walled off Jewish cemetery section that I've only ever been to, and it's awful. It's been vandalised again. Yeah, because no one's been buried there for a long time.
It's almost perpetually locked, and it's just adjacent to the large poor cemetery there. Speaking of a shared history of this city,
the cemetery with the underground wall.
That's down in the which speaks again of a divided city, a divided community. The irony is that the wall was sunk, but it never served the purpose for which it was sunk there in the first place. So that should be a very interesting day. I would expect a very moving event this coming year.
You should just give it a wee plug there, shouldn't you, really?
Yeah.
What dates are the festival on this year?
The festival starts on the 1st of February this year, starting with the launch of an exhibition in Artcetera in Rosemary Street, a photographic exhibition looking at those who have come to this city from the rest of the world and now call it home. So the photographic exhibition this year is on that. Last year it was on homelessness, an increasing phenomenon in our society. But this year we're looking at those who have come and made Belfast their home.
Brilliant. And we're having one of the other committee members, Ed Peterson, on for our next podcast. So we'll be chatting to him about his work in Clonard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But what's given you the most satisfaction across all the amazing things that you've really done in your life in terms of your ministry?
Well, I must say that Four Corners now really does bring. You hinted at it, brings a lot of the threads of what I felt called to and skilled at together, and these last 11 years now working with the festival has been a really superb time. I said, that we laugh our way through 3/4 of a year and somehow God pulls a festival out of it.
Yeah, you do plug it with a sense of a man who says, here's what I think is probably going to happen. Which I like very much.
Absolutely. But it's because it does bring so many. You mentioned Ed Peterson. I mean, Ed first came into my life through the work of Clonard in my time in Springfield Road, mentored by the great Jerry Reynolds, who Jerry was an enormous influence on me. The first I encountered Jerry was the Sunday that I took over in Springfield Road. After that firewoman, he came along to that service, the first service that I had in Springfield Road, and his words to me were, as part of the commissioning, he said, David, I want you to be a Methodist minister for me, and I will be a Catholic minister for you. And that sense of mutual support,
it's really important.
Was a real inspiration to me, and has been to this day. And Ed is the epitome of that, someone who is for the other.
This podcast, David's called Inspired to Act, and there's an obvious play on words with yourself there. Do you ever find yourself, and this is probably a weird place to go, do you ever find yourself being the person you feel you should be because that's an easier way to deal with it? How do you stop yourself acting and just being?
That's a really interesting question because given my history, my introduction to most congregations that I've gone to is to show them a pair of Greek drama masks that Diane actually bought for me years ago, and say that those masks are a dangerous thing. In Greek tradition, an actor was a hypocrite, a mask wearer. And there is a danger for us all at times to put on a mask and to hide who we are. And one of the promises I try to give my congregations at the beginning, that despite my past and my skill set, yes, there will be times when I will perform, but I hope that I never wear a mask in front of them, that they see me for who I am, and I hope that they allow me to see them for who they are. But there are times in engaging with difficult situations where for my self-protection and for other self-protection, you have to wear a mask. You have to just get through things. But the day when that becomes the default is the day when I will stop, because it is about being honest with others about where we're coming from, about the hurts and the pains that we feel and others feel. We just need greater honesty in how we engage with each other in general, but particularly in this province of ours.
And going back to what you were saying right at the beginning, which is that sense of you being called into the ministry so that you could unlock the potential of others. Yeah. It's through our vulnerability and our ability to be vulnerable and that honesty that you're talking about that enables other people to do the same.
Yeah, and that was another long. It was a hard learned lesson on that front in terms of vulnerability, because I like to think that I'm a fairly capable guy, and one of the ideas that people have about leadership and about ministry is that you appoint strong leaders. But in my time in Dundonald, I went through a period where I was burnt out. I'd been involved in so many things. I'd seen so many things that I got to the stage where I had nothing left in the tank. And in the wake of that, and being honest about where I was with my people in Dundonald, I would say that my last couple of years in Dundonald were probably the most profitable pastorally in terms of engaging with people. However, I would say that there were those who, both in the wider civic sphere and in the church, who saw me as busted,
broken vessel,
and didn't know then how to engage with me, because that model of vulnerable leadership is not one that we can get our heads around easily. Yeah, I really do think that it is the most powerful.
Because it gives other people the opportunity to be honest. It gives them the chance to
absolutely.
say, this is okay.
It models how we really should be with one another.
We can't thank you enough for being so honest and so open and occasionally vulnerable with us in this session. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks very much, David. It's been great to have you in the studio. I've wanted to have you here for a while.
It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for listening and supporting us.
And that's it for Inspired to Act this time. We're made for Thrive Ireland, and you can read more about us at thriveIreland.org or on our Facebook page. Do like or follow us and tell others about this podcast.
We're recorded and produced at the Commission Broadcast Centre. You can find out more at commissionradio.org or on Facebook.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.